Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Willy Daunic of 102.5 The Game. This episode presented by Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We'd also like to thank the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Today's news is presented by Sutherland & Belk, an SEC sports-loving injury firm in Nashville. Sutherland & Belk will shoot you straight on your rights and your options when you've been injured in an accident. Call them at 615-846-6200 to get your questions answered. You can also visit them online at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt heads to Kansas City's Urban Youth Academy for an exhibition baseball game this weekend on Saturday at noon. The Commodores take on Oklahoma State. Today's guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're fantastic. They are also fair trade certified. That means they are made under safe conditions by men and women treated and paid fairly. Try them free for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress, which was voted Best Mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That's spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy and get $50 off your first set of sheets. Willy Daunic joins us now. He is a radio talk show host on 102.5 The Game. He is the play-by-play voice of the Nashville Predators. You know him as a former Vanderbilt baseball and basketball player. Willy, time is limited today, so welcome to the show. Let's get right into it. Your thoughts on Vanderbilt's upset of Missouri?
Well, Chris, I've been watching Vanderbilt football pretty regularly since 1989, so that dates me a lot. So we're talking about 3 decades of action here, and I don't know that I've seen a more out-of-nowhere win, and it was the way that they won. It wasn't like Missouri turned the ball over 7 times or Vanderbilt got some very lucky bounces or anything. I just thought they played a very sound game. So a very unexpected, pleasant surprise, and one that has really twisted the plot, I think, of the entire program going forward here.
Well, no doubt about the plot being twisted. I was talking with Norman Jordan last night. Vanderbilt has pulled some upsets. In my memory, I do not remember one where it was a greater underdog. The line on that, I think the final line was 21, maybe 22 points. I don't ever remember Vanderbilt winning as a bigger underdog. Do you?
I do not. I can remember Vanderbilt as probably a bigger underdog, staying in the game, having the lead late, and not being able to quite hang on. That's been a much more common storyline. You know, flirting with a big win like that, but not being able to get it. And so I think that's what made it that much more impressive. The way they did it, to lose the lead in the way that they did, Riley Neal throwing the interception, but then recovering mentally and leading them on the go-ahead touchdown drive, and then Keyshawn Vaughn and company being able to basically run the clock out in a classic 4 to 6 minute, just keep grinding and getting the 10 yards and moving the chains. That was very impressive. That has not been seen very much over the years in Vanderbilt football.
I don't know what callers to your show have been like this week, but the posters on my side have had a hard time processing it. I think everybody was glad that they won. I think everybody is skeptical whether it fixes anything in the program long term. And I think someone I talked to in the press box said it best. It's like, is this good or bad? Because them winning and playing the way they did sure beg a lot of questions about what they were doing before.
Yeah, I think it was very mixed on our reaction on the show. And I think you have 2 points of view. One point of view is really from casual fans or Nashville residents or outsiders, I would call them, who look at the big picture and they say, well, Vanderbilt has not really shown a great commitment to football. They like Derek Mason as a person. They hear him all over the airwaves. He's very accessible. He's a person that everybody likes. And so they want to support him, and they want to say, well, how in the world is he supposed to win at a high level when he doesn't have what everybody else in the league has? I think that's a very sound point of view from the outside. But I also understand the people that watch Vanderbilt every week and have been extremely frustrated to this point of the season to have, especially the three weapons on offense and not really have it click. I can understand why they are very, very puzzled at how they've gotten to this point and how they have sort of reached wit's end a little bit, and now they don't know what to think. So you see the 2 points of view I'm talking about. I think it's a little different if you watch them every week and every year.
Well, and I wrote about this right after the UNLV loss, and I may end up eating my words on this somewhat. I thought that was a game that when you're sitting there watching, you're seeing the texts that I was getting on my phone and where those texts were coming from. I just didn't think he would survive maybe even the weekend. And that UNLV loss is one that, like I said, that seemed like at the time a signature loss like Watson Brown had at SMU. I could name some other ones, but it put him firmly in that territory. And so I do wonder if maybe that Missouri win, coupled with a couple more, I think that will give him a stay of a year. But I wonder if that won't end up being sort of his undoing, because that loss makes it almost impossible for them to have a winning season now. And at some point, he's got to have one of those. Let's say he gets 2020 and still doesn't have one. I'm projecting ahead, but it's to make kind of a point on the landscape around his job. You really can't go 7 straight seasons without a winning record. I think that UNLV game really could have cost him his opportunity. Maybe we look back and say they turned it around, but that was the thing that kept him from having a winning season, if that makes sense.
Well, that's why I think let's back up for 1 second. We had him on our show yesterday, Coach Mason, and I know everybody saw the emotional outburst on the field and in the press conference after they won. And I think that sort of told you how it had really come to sort of a crisis moment, a big crossroads. I think he really knew that the pressure was real, and the actual thought process of, is this the end of the line? I think that resonated with him. He knew there was a lot of noise, and it wasn't probably just noise. I think there was some real talk like, wait a minute, this has got to be better. And he knew it as well. And so I think that's why you saw him react accordingly. So now the question is, what happens from here to the end of the season to where he can prove that he is the right guy moving forward under Malcolm Turner? Because I think we know Malcolm Turner has got his plan. He wants to put his stamp on the football program, the athletic program. I think he's got some big ideas. Hopefully, with him being the new guy and he was brought in to do this, he'll get some resources to back that up. And is Derek Mason his man? That's got to be Derek Mason's goal. And his team's got to play well enough from here to the end of the year. I've said this before on our podcast, Chris. The winning record thing to me is misleading. When you go 6-6 and lose the bowl game, that's not the same thing as a losing record. It's not even close to the same thing. And so I don't understand how people like to say, well, they're 6-7. There's an asterisk by that 6-7 when you get to a bowl game.
That's true, but I know the last year's Baylor game was eminently winnable. I mean, that was another 6-6 team.
Well, yeah, the bowl
sure.
game is winnable, but it's like so is a team's wild card game in the NFL. And if you lose that, it's not the same thing as losing the last regular season game and not making the playoffs. There's a big difference.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense from that perspective. Well, I feel badly for him because I feel like the criticism honestly gets a little mean. It gets into his speech and his verbal tics and things like that, and things that I don't think you say in a decent manner towards a coach, if that makes sense. At the same time, I didn't really care for his post-game talk. I didn't think that was the appropriate time to be pointing fingers at people. He's the coach. He's responsible for things. So that was just a weird moment on top of everything else.
Well, again, it depends on your perspective. If you're around every day, it was probably different than from afar. If you're only seeing it from the perspective of, how hard that job is. That job is the toughest job in the SEC, hands down. It might be the toughest Power 5 job. You could probably have an argument about what is the toughest job in the Power 5. But I would rank Vanderbilt in the top 5 of that easily, if not number 1. So I think that's kind of what his message was. So whether that will help him or not, I don't know. But I would have to say that for people on the general side of things, and that's kind of the perspective I have a lot as a talk show host, I see both because I follow Vanderbilt very closely, but the general media only follows to a point. They're on the side of Derek Mason. There's no question. They resonate with Derek Mason because he has made good contacts with everybody. He comes across well, and I think people realize he's under the gun, and it's a tough job. Now, that being said, the expectations of the Vanderbilt fans have gone up, right? We used to think as Vanderbilt people, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could ever get to a bowl game? Now that's not the expectation anymore. The expectation is to consistently go to bowl games. That has changed. That's a 180 from 10, 15 years ago.
Well, and the thing about him, there are some things that you look at him historically, and again, I say this all the time, to judge any coach right now or recently, you have to look at Vanderbilt since 1960. That's when administratively threw in the towel on football, basically, and has really never committed to it since. He ranks pretty well with other coaches. He's like probably in the top third, maybe top 35, 40%. But, he's obviously he's behind in terms of winning percentage. He's behind Franklin and Sloan, and there's a couple other guys in there too. I don't remember who. But, I mean, percentile, while he's well above average for Vanderbilt, I guess the question is, what kind of pool of coaches are we comparing him to? I mean, it's once you start to unwind this whole thing, sometimes it becomes very difficult to put a finger on where responsibility is.
Well, they're below expectations for this year. I don't think there's any question, even after that win, as we know. As you said, I think it's a fair point that win even has you more puzzled as to why it couldn't have been better in the previous 2 weeks, because just the win over UNLV would have you thinking, okay, they're sort of right on schedule, like they had been the last two times they made the bowl game, where they had the late run and were able to beat Tennessee and get to a bowl game. Those were, that's kind of the thing that was unfolding there. Had they just held on to serve against UNLV, but instead it was the opposite, the debacle that had sort of the bottom falling out until they recovered and won on Saturday. So, it's all part of your perspective, I think. But I think it's certainly important to say that they've had some big wins. I remember I was in school early 90s, and then up until Bobby Johnson broke through and went to a bowl game, and a couple years before that, they went to the bowl game in 2008. They beat Tennessee, and help me, Chris, that was what, 06 or 05?
05. It was Cutler's senior year,
right.
Yes.
Right. So between 1990 and 2005, we're talking about 15 years. Tell me the biggest win that they had. I guess you could say Jerry DiNardo went to Georgia and won. Jermaine Johnson had a big game. But you can count on one hand the amount of wins against upper, top 25 type of teams, wins over Tennessee, wins that really had impact on people. Derek Mason has had his share in his 5 years. He's had way more than a lot of the coaches. So the expectation level has changed. And I think that's important to point out when you evaluate him. And to me, that's a good thing. But then the question is, what does Malcolm Turner think the expectation should be? And what's he going to do to change the perception from the outside that you need to do better? You should do better, and you're equipped to do better.
Yeah, and just so happens, I did research this week, again, starting with 1960, their records against ranked teams, because Vanderbilt does not get a lot of quality wins that often. Since 1960, Vanderbilt is 16-175-2 against the top 25. That's an 8.8% winning percentage. That includes a win that Jerry DiNardo got by an Alabama forfeit. So take that out, it becomes even worse because they didn't win that game on the field. Here are their top 25 wins since 1960. They don't have any from there on until 1968. Bill Pace beats Alabama. Steve Sloan gets Florida in 74. McIntyre beats Florida in 82. Watson Brown, and probably the most random game, and I would compare this very much to that. Watson Brown beat Florida in 1988, just out of the blue. In 91, DiNardo beats Georgia. In 92, he beats Ole Miss. And then in 93, he gets the forfeit. Bobby Johnson beats Georgia in 2006. Then Bobby Johnson gets 3 in 2008 against South Carolina, Auburn, and Boston College. Franklin gets NC State in 2012, Georgia in 2013. Actually, the NC State game, I'm not sure if they were even ranked. I might have to double check that. But then it's Mason against Tennessee in 16, Kansas State in 17, and Missouri this year. I mean, wins of that magnitude are just hard to come by no matter who the coach is.
Well, they went, as you pointed out, I mean, take the forfeit out of there. That's I'm not counting that. That's 14 years with 0. 14 straight years without one. The other thing you have to look at, too, is wins against teams who at the time were not ranked that ended up being ranked or close to ranked. I mean, there's significant wins you can get. And I would argue that any win over Tennessee is significant, as bad as they have been the last couple of years. I mean, you keep them out of a bowl game, that's significant. So you can kind of pick through and find that. I would also ask the question, what is that stat relative to other teams who are unranked? What is the regular percentage of unranked teams against ranked teams? I'll bet it's not great, but I come back to the same thing.
Yeah,
the level of expectation, the belief that you can win more games now is so much different than it was in 1997, 1999. You know, pick a year in that span where they go.
Sorry, you're cutting in and out a little bit, so I hope I'm not cutting you off here. Yeah, and of course it also works the other way. Like Bobby Johnson's win over Auburn in 2008. Auburn did not finish in the top 25. Boston College did not finish in the top 25. Of course, that was also by virtue of getting beat by Vanderbilt in the bowl game. So there is that. But let's go ahead and move on to the mailbag because there's a couple questions in here I want to get to. The mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Need home, auto, motorcycle, renters, landlord, life, or commercial insurance? Josh is who you need to contact. Call him 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Give him a try. I think you'll be pleased. Vandy Nash says, how does Mason get this team to play at the same level against South Carolina and Florida? In your opinion, does the same team show up in Columbia?
Well, I think the better question is the same effort at South Carolina or at Florida, would that be good enough to get a win? I don't know. And I would also say if they play well but fall short, what does that do to the future? Because let's be honest, at South Carolina and at Florida, they're going to be an easy touchdown dog, probably at Florida double-digit dog. True?
Yes.
So they'd have to pull a huge upset again to get one of those two, and that's obviously what it's going to take to get back on track if you were even sniffing a chance to get a bowl game. So I go back to the big question is at the end of the year, what does the direction of the program look like? And the one-loss record, let's assume that they can't quite pull off 6-6. Let's say, though, it's 5-7 and looking good at the end, maybe with another win over Tennessee. What does that look like in the outlook, in the mind of the fan base, in the mind of Malcolm Turner, et cetera?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think optics are important. If he shows that he's not lost a team and say they lose Florida and South Carolina, but they're competitive, I think you have to take that into consideration.
Also, keep this in mind. In the outlook, you have Keyshawn Vaughn, who I continue to think, as I watch him play, he's the best running back I've ever seen at Vanderbilt. And that's saying something because there's been some pretty good ones through the years, but nobody can do the things he can do. You don't have him next year. You don't have Jared Pinkney next year, and you probably don't have Elijah Lipscomb next year. So that's part of the outlook, right? You're going to have to convince everybody that it's going to be better next year without those three guys, and that's going to be tough to convince people.
Yeah, no, I think where it won't be tough to convince people is on the defensive side that they'll be better. The question will be, will
I
they
agree.
be good enough? Now, and on offense, I do think that they have some pieces that we just have not seen. Now, they're not as good as those three, and losing Vaughn is a killer. And I think the quarterback situation, how that plays out, will also be key. I think next year's starting quarterback is not on the roster right now. So there's that as well. But, I mean, their defense, I believe, I'd have to look this up, but I believe he started 11 underclassmen on Saturday.
I think those are the two huge things coming out of that win that give you cause for optimism. And that probably goes back to the question that from the mailbag is, have they found something on defense, confidence-wise, scheme-wise, talent-wise? I saw a team that looked much faster for whatever reason, flying to the ball, multiple tacklers, gang tackling, extended plays for a mobile quarterback. We couldn't find anybody down the field. That was a pleasant surprise. And they weren't able to just line up and run. So can they sustain that through the rest of the season consistently? That's a huge question. If they can, this is a much different team. And then quarterback play is the other part. I think it's clear that they were very frustrated with Riley Neal's play and the quarterback play in general. They made a radical move to Mo Hassan. Is he for real, or was he just a guy that had a sort of a surprise attack on Missouri? They had no book on him, didn't know what to expect, couldn't have prepared for him. Now the teams have some tape on him. What would he look like if he continues to play? I think that's a big, big question mark.
Well, obviously, if they go with Hassan, and what I'm hearing is he's going to be fine for South Carolina, then obviously teams are just going to say, we're going to still have to stop Keyshawn. And you say, well, they'll have to adjust to that. But, I mean, Missouri was putting 9 guys in the box most of the time anyway. So I don't know how much different it will be than what we saw Saturday. And by the way, that was a really good defense Vanderbilt beat.
Right. And well, the threat of the run is important. Mo Hassan's got to be that running threat. And if he continues to do that, it's all about spacing and spreading it out and using the space on the field. You know, it's really simplifying things. It's Vaughn one way, it's quarterback keeper the other way on the read option, and then if you cheat up, you've got the space to hit your other guys. And I am a believer in the other guys. Cam Johnson is coming on. He's an SEC receiver as a young player, and you've got Lipscomb, you've got other guys. If they can just, work the field and use what you've got. If Hassan is a good enough you don't have to be a great passer if you're a really good running threat. I think college football has proven that over the years. So we'll see if they're onto something there, or was that just a little bit of a wrinkle and a surprise? Can he sustain it week after week? That's a big, big question. I still don't know.
Quick question from Vandy always before I let you go. Do you think Tony Kemp will get a World Series ring if the Astros win the series?
Great question. We've actually kicked that around our studio. I would think yes. Every team, I think, has their own policy on how they do the World Series rings. And my thought would be absolutely. I think Tony Kemp, first of all, as a guy, I think is a very popular guy among the Houston clubhouse. I think the players had any say in it, they would absolutely give one to Tony Kemp. You never know what an owner or whoever makes the decision on the budget for the rings will decide. Like, for example, I think the Cubs, when they broke through and won a few years ago, they gave one to everybody. I think anybody who worked there, basically, or anywhere around the team got one. And then I know about the 86 Mets had kind of a controversy. I only know this because, one, I follow the Mets closer than most. And two, there's a guy from Nashville named John Mitchell that pitched a few games from the 86 World Series. And he and a group of players, and they weren't sure where the line was drawn, but I know they were disappointed that, and others did not. And so it can be a difficult process. But Tony Kemp played all the way through mid-July, at least early to mid-July before he changed teams. So it was around the trading deadline. So that was July 31st. I think.
Yeah,
so
and he would still. Yeah, I was going to say he'd still be with them. I think they were out of options with him, were they not?
Yeah, they designated him for assignment and then traded him to the Cubs at the trade deadline, or right a day or two before the trade deadline.
Yeah, I think that was certainly an example. They would have loved to keep him, but that roster is the most talented one in baseball, and somebody had to go, and unfortunately it was him. And unfortunately, we have to go because you've got a show to do in a few minutes, Willie. I want to give you a moment before you leave to promote your shows, your Predators broadcasts, give out your Twitter handle, and anything else that you would like to promote.
All right. Well, thanks for the chance. It is Willie D 1025 on Twitter. Our show is from 10 to 2. Monday through Friday on 1025 The Game. Derek Mason joins us every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, if you're not already aware of that. And so we've had some very good conversations with him throughout the process. In fact, we kind of pride ourselves. He goes on a lot of shows every week, and I give him a lot of credit for that. But we were one of the few shows that has been doing it for the longest. So I think we have a good relationship with him, and he's been very open and honest with us on any number of subjects. Mitch Light, the sideline reporter, joins us every Tuesday from noon to 1. So that's always worth listening to for some inside perspective on Vanderbilt football. And as a lot of you know, Mitch, who is a Vanderbilt graduate, is also the college football editor for Athlon Sports. So he can talk any college program. So he has great perspective on that.
Thank you, Willie.
Chris, we'll talk to you soon.
You bet. He's Willy Daunic of 102.5 The Game. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. We appreciate you listening. We'll have more episodes coming your way next week.